Well, hi everybody, how are you? It's the Stratosphere Lounge coming to you live from the Stratosphere Lounge here in beautiful downtown Burbank, or somewhat close to that. How's everybody doing? I hope everybody's well. Been a couple weeks, I was on the road. Very strange trip and a little stressful actually. But other than that, back in the chair. So let's see. We've got yet another show today from the archives of the Facebook page. If you want to be part of the fun, you can always go to the Bill Whittle Facebook page, and that will allow you to answer questions. And I'm afraid I haven't had a chance to even look at them yet, which is kind of cool in a way too. It's nice just to be able to go in there and see them, live on the spot. So, yeah, I was in East Texas at Nacogdoches. I have my very own heckler. Was basically the guy looked like, if you can imagine that Trotsky had grown up at Malibu or something. It's kind of this. Second I started talking, he just started yelling at the top of his lungs and wouldn't stop. And I made a note of this to the membership, and basically, I don't know what happened to me, but I became very, very calm, which is not my usual inclination. I mean, this guy was in the front row center of the event, and he was, just teeing off about all the genocide that I supported and all the rest of it, and he wouldn't let people listen. Now, a lot of the people in the crowd were on his side because there were a lot of progressives there in this college in East Texas, out in the middle of nowhere. But seriously, he wouldn't stop, and I just, the more he yelled and screamed, the more calm and quiet I got, and the more I tried to just basically deal with him one issue at a time, because I thought that was the best way to make him look foolish. And over time, I think it might have been working, because the people in the back, the progressives in the back, went from having their faces all screwed up with hate and just basically making speeches to at least listening. And once it became clear to Malibu Trotsky that people were actually listening, you could watch him. I started having a conversation with these people after 10 minutes of this vitriol. And then when he realized that I was actually talking with them, and he would just, basically, he would just stand up again, or when I say stand up, I mean metaphorically stand up. This is easier for people who are not so silly. And try and get the thing off the rails again, back onto him, where it apparently should have been the whole time. So it was a little bit, I don't know, it wasn't fun. Let's put it that way. But it was educational, and it's it's not easy for me to basically, suffer this gladly. But that's my lesson, I guess, and we all have our lessons, God knows. So that's pretty much it. And something just got quiet. I am going to go ahead and just start reading them off of the Facebook page, and we'll do as many as we can. I've still got a few things to do tonight, but I'm making a major effort to get out of here a little early. Hey, and Sailor1701 says his first time watching live. Hey, Sailor, how are you? Good to see you. And we do have an announcement, I remember. Hang on one second. I always like to get these out of the way here. When I say out of the way, I mean I don't want to forget them. One moment, please, while I check my mail from little birdies that send me messages. Here we go. Okay. This goes out to Vincent Ferris. This would be the second time I've had a chance to do this, and that is to congratulate somebody on becoming an Eagle Scout. A couple weeks ago, apparently, Vincent, I don't mean to sound like that I'm just rehashing something. It's just that it's such an honor, and it's so unusual. I don't even know where to start. The first thing I'll probably say, I think, Vincent, is that everybody else your age is going to be working for you. That's the first thing I would say. What that means to me, Eagle Scout, what it means to me is it means a level of discipline, commitment, perseverance, hard work, and a lot of that all at a very young age, and that's why I think Eagle Scouts are so venerated, at least venerated by people who know anything about Eagle Scouts. So first of all, Vincent, congratulations, and I have a rough idea of how much work went into it just from the sidelines in Cub Scouts. And I was in Cub Scouts. I was thinking about going into Webelos, which I think is the SS of Cub Scouting, but I didn't actually do it. But I saw enough of the Boy Scouts and especially of the Eagle Scouts to know how tough an achievement that is, especially today, in terms of your social cohorts. Hard work is not very fashionable anymore. Certainly, scouting isn't as fashionable as it used to be. The There is a tendency, I know, to say, oh, well, Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, what a square. And they can tell you that from the fry station, and they can send you a message up to your penthouse mansion, because what I found through life is that it's all the simple things like, discipline and perseverance and all of the things that, you've not only had to do to become an Eagle Scout, but now that you can demonstrate to people, you have the badge, and the people who know matter, and the people that don't matter don't know. So I think you're going to find that this work's going to pay off, and sooner rather than later, Vincent. I think it's going to pay off much sooner than you think, because as I said, the environment out there is getting more and more lazy, more and more degenerate in just a general sort of way. And I can tell you one thing: if I was looking at job resumes and somebody had Eagle Scout on there, then that'd be an automatic hire for me. And I think probably say that's true for half of the country. So I don't really know how hard you had to work at this, but I know about how hard you had to work at it. And I know, like most things in life that are worthwhile, it's a lot of that work is done, alone, in private. And no fanfare. And so you certainly deserve a little fanfare. And I'm very, very proud of you, and very proud to have people like you, watching the show on a regular basis. And it's just a very high honor for me, actually, to have, as I say, people like you sitting in and watching the show. It's more than an honor to be able to say congratulations to you, Vincent, and I'm sure it couldn't happen to a better young man, and I have no doubt whatsoever we'll be hearing your name in the future. Chances are pretty good you're going to be employing me, I would imagine, somewhere like 2020 seems likely. But congratulations, it's actually a very big deal, and we are very proud of you, all of us here. So again, congratulations, and thank you for the hard work, and thank you for the time you put into it, because it's not just a series of achievements. I look at Eagle Scouts today as I just look at them as basically the repository. They're kind of the moral reservoir of the country. There are a few people left who still understand what these terms mean. So it's an absolute pleasure to be speaking to somebody like that. So congratulations. I know you earned it. So let's see here. I'm going back to the Facebook page, and again, I haven't looked at them tonight. I've been working like crazy on more of these after hours. This week is my friend Larry O'Connor. It's a really fun interview, really, really good. And so let's see what we got here. It looks like the number one by far is Kevin Jordan's. And again, I haven't read this, so I'll just read it as it comes. So here's our first question. I can't understand this kind of evil, Bill. The average adult in Venezuela has lost 19 pounds since their socialist economic crisis began last year. And these people weren't robust to begin with. The only story I see about Venezuela is Rachel Maddow reporting that the protests in the streets are against a U.S. White House declaration, and that Donald Trump is the biggest political threat to their people. Children are starving to death. Their government and society are crumbling under socialism again. And the only thing the left can do is twist these facts to try and hurt people they disagree with, while covering up the actual horrors of what's going on, ensuring that no actual help will be granted to them. Are they stupid or actually soulless? It's horrifying, and it's on my news feed in spades every single day. Wow, it's a profoundly good and very heartfelt question, Kevin. Very, very well written as well. This is the big issue. Without doubt, the young people that call themselves socialists don't know. They just don't know. They don't have a clue. And it's the job of the university system to make sure that they don't get any clues. It's the job of the university system today is to make sure that no one possibly gets an education, because an education would mean that you did know about things like this. I did an interview with Evan Sayed on After Hours 2 weeks ago, and he was kidding around, but everything he says is actually so deep and as well as being funny. And he was saying that that the job of the academic is so unserious that simply using the word academic goes to immediately make the subject not serious. What I mean by that is, well, is this thing higher than that thing? You know what? It's all academic. Doesn't matter is what it means. Academic means it doesn't matter. So Rachel Maddow is an academic. She's on television, so I've heard. But this is academia. And the only people that still believe in this kind of socialism, which is pretty much communism down there with Hugo Chavez, the only people that still believe in this stuff are people that have not only never experienced it, but also people who have who will not go and experience it. There's so many people. I remember I did a speaking event not too long ago, and this one woman was an front row, actual honest to God communist, and real disheveled and so on. Just thought that we should take everything from everybody who works, every business owner. She said we should take 100% of what you make. And I said, you really think that people would stick around and do that? She said, I don't care. She doesn't care. She wants nobody to be looking better than she is in terms of achievement. And if that means everybody's poor together and there's no economy, so there's no tax base, so there's no food relief for poor people, that doesn't matter to people like her, because it's not about the poor. This kind of socialism is not about helping the poor. This kind of socialism is not about relieving the workers. It's not about any of that stuff. This phenomenon is powered by envy. And envy is a very easy thing to sell to small-minded people. And this is the whole essence of what modern progressivism is. It's basically a deal where these academics say, I'm going to get you all ginned up about injustices and inequalities which may or may not exist. And then in exchange for voting for me, I'm going to take stuff from these people that we can agree to hate together, and I'll give it to you. When I say I give it to you, I mean I'll give a little bit of it to you. Most of it I'm going to keep for myself. So that's basically how it works. It's a thug who basically is able to convince other kids on the playground, the slow ones, and I don't mean the slow ones mentally, because God knows there are... anytime I see anybody working hard, that person's a friend of mine. I don't care how smart they are. I don't care what they're doing. If they're working hard and they're good at it, they're a friend of mine. I respect them far more than I respect these Harvard professors who talk about socialism and communism. I respect a hardworking janitor infinitely more than Bernie Sanders. So this works. The only place that communism works is in the teacher's lounge or the classroom. And you would think after a while that this would begin to sink in. I talked to some more people on this trip I made, along with Malibu Trotsky, and a couple people there said we're socialists. And I said, well, let's just start with 150 million people dead, and they were outraged. They were saying that they didn't do it right. Essentially, is what they were saying. They didn't do it right. How many times do you have to not do it right? It kills people. The deeper question, I think, Kevin, is what is the appeal of it? Why does it appeal to the people that it appeals to? Once again, I'm back reading my Russian history, and once again, I'm back with Lenin. Most people think that Stalin corrupted the Russian people, and that Lenin was this kind God. No, everything horrible that happened in Soviet Russia was designed by Lenin. So what was Lenin's approach, and how did Lenin succeed? And what was this whole Soviet communist revolution about, this fight for socialism? By the way, you want to split hairs over whether it's socialism or communism, doesn't matter to me. They called it socialism. That's what they called it. and they fought for socialism, so that's good enough for me. So what is it about that particular philosophy that can be sold to people under certain circumstances? And the one thing I think you find all the time is that it is a philosophy of envy. It's sold to people who either do not have any means of social and economic advancement, or they're told that they don't have any means of social economic advancement, which is pretty much the same thing. And the part I'm most interested in is the people that are actually doing the selling, not doing the buying. The thing that's so remarkable about the Soviet revolution, the October Revolution 100 years ago, is that everybody who became a member of the government essentially overnight, none of them had any jobs at all. They were, every one of them, professional revolutionaries. And you have to think about that. I mean, what did Lenin do before he became, ruler of 1/6 of the surface of the earth? Far more power than a czar. What did Lenin do? Was he raised in court? Was he trained to become, emperor of this land? No. Lenin basically was kind of a spoiled kid. All the girls and the sisters and everybody kind of hovered over him. He was a smart kid, but he was obnoxious about it. Imagine my surprise. And Lenin's father was a hereditary nobleman. Lenin was a hereditary nobleman. Lenin, during the years leading up to the revolution, would just jet down to Morocco and go to Switzerland, or he'd do whatever he had to do. And he'd do 6 weeks over in Sochi or something like that. And the thing that's so remarkable, if you look at the history of these guys, is that none of them work. They don't work. They read. And this, I think, is the connection. The reason that professors and people take Bernie. Bernie is a perfect example. Bernie Sanders is talking about socialism. Bernie Sanders wants a 93% tax rate on people in this country who are working and succeeding. And Bernie Sanders has never had a job in his life. He's been paid to be an academic. He's been a mayor or something. What the heck is that? And he's just simply not. He's never worked, and he doesn't want to work. And the people who are voting for him don't want to work. So I know I'm kind of meandering around a little bit. Here's the problem that the Soviets had trying to sell envy, because when you've got the peasantry, I want to say the Russian peasantry was something like 93% of the population, somewhere around there at the time of the revolution. And you're trying to sell envy to people who live in a little village and who have never seen the cities, can't even imagine cities. How are you going to gin up envy for people who live in these tiny little Russian villages? Well, as it turns out, they had a campaign of envy against the wealthier of these poor peasants, called the kulaks. The word kulak means fist, tight fist. People are holding on to things. And to make a long story short, the kulaks were the farmers who were the most effective. They were the most efficient. And when you say that the kulaks were a richer class of peasants, that meant that they may have a cow instead of no cows, or maybe they hired another peasant or two for harvest. But they were not wealthy people by any means. They were just more successful peasant farmers than the rest of the peasants. There's a word for the other peasants too, and I've forgotten. I just read it yesterday for the first time. But when you get to that level of helplessness, when you haven't had any means of controlling your destiny for hundreds of years, you get nasty. And since you don't feel like you can go out and get your own, the only thing you can do to give you any sense of accomplishment relative to anyone else is tear somebody else down. You work all you want to under the Tsar or under the communists. The more you work, the more they're going to take, and eventually they'll take all of it. And then when the Bolsheviks come along, they'll kill you for your trouble. So what do? They hate people that are doing marginally better than them. And that's all they do, is they spend their entire days comparing themselves to other people. So look, you've got professors in college, let's just say Harvard for the sake of it, and they are academics. They're professional revolutionaries. Malibu Trotsky, by the way, I looked up. He was hard to find because, like most people, he's does everything anonymously and in the dark like most cowards. But I looked him up, and he listed his occupations as writer and activist. That's why I call him Malibu Trotsky. That's all Trotsky was. Trotsky was a writer, and he was an activist, which means an agitator. His job was to go out and get people angry when they weren't angry before. And if you get them angry enough, then sooner or later they'll result to violence. And if you can rein the violence in by being more violent and more cruel, then congratulations, you're the head of a gigantic state. But Malibu Trotsky that's not a job. It's a degree in ecology, I think. But it's not a job. I was a writer for 20, 30 years before I got paid to write. I mean, enough to make it my full-time job. I'm a writer. That's my full-time job. I suspect that he's not making a living writing, or is he making a living agitating either? So he's a good example of the kind of dynamic. You got people who are very sure of themselves, very bitter, very smart in many cases, but unwilling or unable to make the connection between work and reward. And so they become Malibu Trotskys. Everything is evil. Obama's a war criminal, Trump's a war criminal, Bush is a war criminal. The state is designed to murder people. The police are here as an execution squad for black Americans. And on and on and on and on, just nothing but rage and bile, nothing but rage, bile, cynicism, and this nailing yourself to a cross of your own construction to show everybody that you alone are the only individual on earth who's got the moral depths to be outraged by all of this. And it's just, I know what it is. It's just a form of self-loathing, and people like Malibu Trotsky cannot understand why they are struggling to make their rent in their miserable little apartments while the idiot down the street who owns a car dealership has $30 million. They can't understand it. They can't understand it because they live in their heads. And this is something I've had some experience with. They live in their heads. And so did Trotsky, so did Lenin, so did all these people. Stalin had one job. He worked at a weather station writing down weather information for a couple of months or something. It was the only job he ever had. Zinoviev, Kamenev, Bukharin, all these guys, they're just professional students. Professional students. And when you give professional students power, they bring all of the disadvantages of students into the mix. Students, college students, believe that the world is easily changed, and the reason it's not better is because people are so evil. Otherwise, why wouldn't they make the changes that are so obvious to college students? They are so sure of themselves, and this is kind of a sad loop in history, but it is a loop. It's exactly what it is. College students are convinced that they're pick one, just find a college student, and that person will tell you that their generation is the first one to really see what's wrong with the world and have an idea about changing it. And when you tell them that every single college student has had that attitude throughout history, going back to the Greeks, if you tell them that every single person, that an 80-year-old guy sitting on that bench over there and a 40-year-old guy in that car and a 60-year-old guy here and so on, every single one of them basically had the same thoughts when they were 20, they will tell you, yeah, well, we're different than that. And we will say, I know you're saying you're different than that. We said we were different than that too. There's not 1 in 100 who's going to learn from that. And if they are, they go on to be Eagle Scouts. So it's this infantile view of things. And again, back to Lenin. Lenin was writing reports on etiquette, and he was writing. He was talking about the kind of glue you would put on envelopes. He's not a serious person, but he's a deadly person. And anything that was going wrong was just obviously the fault of something else, because he can't be wrong. He's got a theory. Marx is perfect, and so it's got to be wrecking or sabotage. So you're going to have to kill those people. And this is the key. You cannot get large numbers of people to murder large numbers of people unless they feel like they're murdering for a worthy cause. And that's the secret sauce that makes collectivism work. Somebody corrected me. I think it might have been Evan Say it again who corrected me on this. It's not just. I would say that what socialists are selling is, look, there's somebody who's doing better than you. Take their stuff. And Evan corrected me because he's right about this. He said, not only is there somebody over there doing better than you, but you did the work and he got the reward. And that's where this becomes really galvanizing, changes from a sort of a general sense of discontent into actual murderous rage, is people are convinced that their failures are the result of external forces. And so when you tell them that we're going to go and finally get even with those external forces, they're ready to do just about anything. And one of the things they're most ready to do is kill people. So nobody knows how many kulaks. I think they had a record of 1 or 2 million, but they only counted the head of the household. Those are big families, so you got to figure 7, 8, 9 million people killed by the communists, but turned in by other people in the village. That guy's got a cow. I don't have a cow. I'm going to denounce him. Since I can't get a cow, or I don't want to work hard enough, as he does, since he's got a cow and I don't, and I'm either unable or unwilling to work as hard as he is and have a cow of my own, then what I'm going to do is much easier than that. I'm going to make basically a phone call, and I'm going to denounce him. And next thing you know, he will be gone. He'll disappear. And the cow will remain here. And so will the house that he evacuated, and so on. It's just the most low-down, evil, wretched form of aggression and murder that I've ever read of. And it just kept going. And of course it consumed it themselves, but they're never aware enough to understand that when they build these machines like this Antifa movement today, where you've got these, by the way, if you look at these kids in this anti-fascist movement, Antifa, you'll see that they're all dressed in black and they're all trying to look like badasses. And if you look at them, you'll find that every single one of these is a white kid from the suburbs. You can just tell. This is the first time that these young males ever had a chance to feel like men. They're not allowed to compete in this world, but they are allowed to do one thing, and that is they're allowed to fight fascism. So if Donald Trump's a fascist, it's okay to kill Donald Trump. If conservatives are fascists, it's okay to kill conservatives. And that's how it works. So you can find these figures all throughout history. Let's just play, shall we? In the Soviet Union, it was a class war. And the enemy were the bourgeoisie, were the people who were the oppressors. And so since the working people had been oppressed by the bourgeoisie, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution wasn't very pretty in many regards. You basically could have a society that would go on for 7 decades by saying, we're going to kill these people and take their stuff because of what they did to us in the past. Let me know if any of that sounds familiar, by the way. In Russia, it was the kulaks. It was simple farmers who were better farmers than the rest of the farmers. Those people were made the demons. They were the ones who stole everything from the regular people, so they were killed. And then when they were killed, the bad farmers got to move into the nicer places. That's just one of the side effects that's very nice. You saw this in the city too. In Moscow, secret police would come and arrest somebody. The elevator would go up the middle of the night in the loop in the city. It's the building on the embankment. It's one of these gigantic Stalinist nightmares where all the party officials lived, and for the few of those people that survived it, many of them couldn't go to sleep at night. They had to wait till sunrise because the NKVD or the Cheka or OGPU or whatever you want to call them, because they kept changing their name, they always worked at night. And so you would be in this apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning, and if you could sleep, you would be woken up by the sound of this very loud elevator in the center of this kind of badly built apartment. And you would lie there and hold your breath until you could hear the elevator past your floor, at which point you could roll over and get a little sleep. So they come and take somebody else out of this building almost every night, something like that. And then, here's the good news. Now, this crowded apartment building has one open apartment, and everybody gets to move up. And it's the same exact thing with the Nazis. The Nazis' target, obviously, were the Jews. The Jews were ruining everything and taking people's stuff and unjust and unfair and so on. So, it's it's one thing to kill 6 million people in little concrete boxes, but they weren't people. They were Jews. They were people who had obviously sucked all the money out of the system, and that's why poor German idiots like those making up the essay felt, well, we have a right to beat these people up and kill them. They took all our stuff, which they never had in the first place, which they never made and couldn't make, these animals. So it was the same exact thing, and the same kind of complicity too. Most of the German people didn't know what was going on. I think the number of Nazis, the percentage was either 4%, 7% of the German population. So you can say that most of the Germans didn't inflict this, and that would be true. But the other thing you can say that is also true and that you can't get away from is when the SS came and took Jewish families out of a building, Germans moved into those apartments. Some cases in Germany and the Soviet Union, people would move into the apartment and the kettle would still be warm. People had been there 20 minutes, half an hour ago. And so everybody knew that, maybe they're taking him to work someplace, but I get a nicer apartment, and then so there you go. So anyway, this is a long rant about this whole thing because it's on one hand, it's so simple, and on the other hand, it's so enormous. So Hugo Chavez comes down to the biggest oil reserves in the Western Hemisphere, second in the world or something like that. Unbelievable amounts of wealth. And he comes to power by ginning people up about how badly they're doing because somebody else has taken their stuff, and he's going to, if they'll elect him or support him, he will go and take the stuff from the rich people and give it to you poor working people. And it's a powerful drug for people who don't have any sense of being able to guide their own destiny. And there you go. So I know I'm just kind of went round and round with that one. I don't know if there's really any particular point so much as it's just the thing that struck me the most was how childish these Bolsheviks were, and how unbelievably morally bankrupt any opposition to the party, and it's just kill them. You have to kill them. They think differently than we do. And this is the final thing I think about it, Kevin. The appeal of it's the appeal of theory. It's the appeal of theory. We see some of this with the global warming models, I think, where you put so much effort into this theory and you're convinced that this theory is correct. Lenin would brook no discussion at all about not only about whether communism and socialism was right, but of what different flavor of communism. He just wouldn't hear it. He was so sure that he alone could see the theoretical underpinnings of Marxism. And so it's a theory. And it's got nothing to do with the real world. As I said, these people didn't live in the real world. They were professional students and professional agitators and professional revolutionaries. And that combination of moral certainty plus theory led to a lot of deaths. And I think I'll wrap it up by saying this. One thing that's become clear to me now is very simple, and that is that people will join the Communist Party, or they'll join the Nazi Party, or they'll join this anti-fascist movement because it gives them a fig leaf to go out and beat people up. I had thought that they had thought that they were really, well, this is violence, but it's the cause. No, they're not doing violence in the name of the cause. They have a cause because it allows them to go out and be violent. This is the kind of people we're dealing with. And these Antifa people are exactly the same as the brown shirts, and they're exactly the same as the Cheka and the SS. They're all the same, all cut out of the same cloth. They're murderous fanatics, and they have got to be stopped. And I've seen them face to face, and it's alarming. It's alarming to see the genuine, genuine social justice warriors, and how 100% certain they are, how unremittingly violent they are, how filled with rage and hatred, and how unwilling they are to give an inch of ground or even listen to anybody talk. As a matter of fact, they're not only not interested in listening to other people's positions, but they will do everything in their power to make sure that no other positions are heard because they're religious fundamentalists. They're fanatics. They're the Inquisition. And this is the lock that I've been trying to pick for the last 20 minutes or half hour, Kevin, is the psychology of the people that keep going for this. The simple people in Venezuela or in Russia or whatever are told life's going to get better. Okay. But Rachel Maddow must know that that Venezuela has been a catastrophe, and she must know that the Soviets killed millions of people. She wouldn't take the Nazis as socialists. She would say they're anti-socialists, but they're not. They're socialists, the National Socialist German Worker Party. So the communists were class socialists, and the Nazis were race socialists. But they both had somebody to hate. That's the main thing. And it's the philosophy of the lazy, of the small, of the violent. It's the philosophy of the bitter, envious, worst people in the world. And the terrible aspect of it is they're not going to realize how terrible it is until they get it, and they may get it. What do you say? I would just like them all to go live in socialist countries. And by the way, am I the only person who's like a little bit surprised that more of these Malibu Trotskys don't go and live in workers' paradises? Why aren't they going to Cuba or North Korea? Why aren't they going to these places that are left? Why? Why is everybody trying to get out? Why were all the rafts going north and none of them going south? Why did nobody get shot going into East Germany? Why? They're not interested in that, because then it would become real, and then they'd have to deal with it in the real world, and the real world is not their forte. So instead of changing their opinions to match reality, they change reality to match their opinions. And you can write that one down, because that's exactly what they do. They go to war against reality in order so that they don't have to change their minds, because they're fanatics. Okay, moving on. Michelle Tongai, I haven't heard from him quite a while. Let's see what this is all about. There's an Iraq veteran who's riding his horse from Santa Monica, California to Washington, D.C. It's about 3,000 miles to bring awareness of the effects of Agent Orange on our forgotten veterans of the Vietnam War. How about a little help in spreading the word about his mission? I don't know if I see any links here. Oh, there it is. expeditionorange.org. Vietnam was different. One of the things about Vietnam, of course, is that it was conscript army, not completely, obviously, but there were draftees there, and some people didn't have a choice. Some people didn't volunteer. I'm not up on my Agent Orange, but it seems pretty clear to me that the government was not just negligent, but just simply criminally obtuse about the effects of this on its soldiers. For those of you who may not know what Agent Orange is a form of what would I call it? It's not a pesticide. Basically, Agent Orange is designed to kill plants, and the idea would be, and I think it's because it had this bright orange color when they would kind of go crop dusting with it. So the idea is, in Vietnam, we're fighting an enemy that lives in the jungle. That the jungle is the cover for much weaker forces that could never go up against us toe to toe, but they hide and launch ambushes and so on, and they do this from the protection of the jungle, which is a very, very good, I'm sure quite the best environment in the world to hide in, with the possible exception of a city, let's say, urban warfare. So somebody figured out if the communists are hiding in the jungle, and if we see them, we can kill them, why don't we just get rid of the jungle? That's pretty much it. So they sprayed this defoliant. That's the word I think I'm looking for. And basically they'd spray it over area of jungle that they wanted to secure. And I got the defoliant before J.C. Pershing did, but just barely. And so they'd spray it over an area that they wanted to get, that we wanted. We'd sprayed it over an area that we wanted to get control over. And the effects on humans and other animals apparently is not good. Defoliant, yes, there it comes, all of them. So, I've always felt this way. We don't know what we don't know, and we don't know what we don't know while we don't know it. And I am willing to excuse a great deal of error the first time. People make mistakes, and I don't think that I'm quite certain that nobody said, "Oh, this is going to kill our troops or maim them or cause them unbearable pain for the rest of their lives," but we're going to drop it anyway. I don't believe that for a second. I think all of this stuff was discovered after the fact. It's like thalidomide. It was what was that? Was it an antibiotic, thalidomide? It was something. Anyway, so this drug comes out called thalidomide, and they put it on the market, and then they find out after the fact that pregnant women taking thalidomide routinely had pretty horrific birth defects in their children. Nobody said, let's just go with the birth defects. They just realized that they didn't know what they didn't know. And I'm ready to excuse a fair amount of that. So what I'm trying to say here is, whether or not the government knew that this was going to hurt their soldiers, and I suspect they did not know, but once it became clear that they did know, then you can start to get to an area for me which is criminal and requires real action. If it turns out that you've got officers who knew that this was dangerous to their troops and denied that it was dangerous to their troops, denied the reports, those people need to go to jail. You wouldn't think that people like that would be in the military. You'd like to think it's not true, and I'm sorry to say it is true. These are the political generals, political officers, and so on. One of the great examples of this, which I simply couldn't believe until I saw enough evidence on it. Hang on a second. What was it? Just lost it. It'll come right back. It was right here. Oh, yes. I was reading about John Boyd, and I've talked about him a lot, and the Pentagon and so on, and procurement of fighter jets and all the rest of it. But what's his name? Pierre Spray was a consultant and a contractor, I think, with the Pentagon, and he got a look at the M2 Bradley, which is for most people, I think it looks like a tank. It's basically it's a station wagon with armor on it, and you put, I don't know, 9, 12 guys inside this thing. It's got a gun on the top. It's not a tank weapon. It's a pretty good anti-personnel weapon. Anyway, these are armored personnel carriers, and their job is to basically take soldiers into hot zones under fire with enough armor protection to protect them from small arms fire and pretty much anything short of anti-tank round. So we had the M1 Abrams, which was a big success, and then they made the M2 Bradley to carry soldiers around behind the M1 Abrams. And the Bradley was a cool design, but there was some serious, serious problems with it. And the problems were that it was far more lethal to the crews than they had expected it to be when they designed and built it. Again, that to me is a forgivable expense, a forgivable offense, I meant to say, because you don't know what you don't know. But once they started testing the Bradleys and found out that they were just, all this spall would come in, a round like a rocket-propelled grenade or something would hit the outside of this vehicle, and molten metal would just jet out throughout the inside and wound or kill everybody in there. When it became known that was done, and that it was a defect in the design, you would think that generals would just simply say, "Oh dear God, what has happened? Pull these things out of service immediately, and let's find out how fast we can get some repairs in there. How fast can we fix this problem?" But that's not what happened. The generals who had been part of the program absolutely denied it. And then, to give you an idea of how far this will go, Spray was talking about that they would do tests on the Bradley, and the Pentagon was going to shoot an RPG, which we're all familiar with, those kind of conical-looking rocket-propelled grenades are like a bazooka. And so the Pentagon knew that the Bradleys had this kind of problem. And so when they tested them with RPGs, they found out that these things were having all these horrible side effects, and if somebody had been in them, they would have been killed. So what did they do? Did they say, here's a problem, we need to fix it? No, what they did was they would do their test on the Bradley, where they'd fire a round into the Bradley, but instead of there being fuel in the fuel tanks, there was water in the fuel tanks. They put water in the fuel tanks to suppress the fires and to suppress, a lot of the explosive effects and the spalling and all the rest of it. They put water in the fuel tanks when they did the test. And another thing they did was they used Czechoslovakian RPGs. I think the warhead is like a third or a quarter as explosive as the Russian Chinese ones. And so basically what they're doing is they've got this kind of, pantomime of, oh, look, see, we shot an RPG at it. It's fine. Well, it's fine because you used a very weak RPG, and the tanks on the Bradley were filled with water, which is not a combat situation as far as I'm aware. I'm not sure that they could send them into combat with water in the fuel tanks. So that's simple deception. That's just simple, plain criminal intent. It's not even negligence. That's just murder. And the idea that officers of any rank would be sending soldiers into combat in vehicles that they knew were defective, and that they also knew, and it wasn't like a sort of a sell. They made a calculation that basically said, okay, if we admit we've got this problem, then my career's over. So instead of that, I'm going to let these young officers and young men, young American enlisted men, go out and get killed because I want my what. Vincent just checked in. Vincent, you're going to have to rewind the tape because we gave you a gigantic, huge Eagle Scout welcome, and I just say it to you again. I just glanced over and noticed you were here. Congratulations on an enormous achievement, and I think the first 5 or 10 minutes of the show was dedicated to you, so congratulations. We're very, very proud of you. Okay, so there you go. So Agent Orange and all the rest of it, and we can make mistakes. What we can't do is we can't cover up our mistakes. That's where it gets to be criminal. So thanks for bringing that to my attention, Michelle. And it's expeditionorange.org. And I'm sure the links for the rest of it are there. Okay, I don't want to go too late tonight. I know we've only not even done an hour yet, but I got a lot of things I have to do, and one of them is go home and have dinner. So let's see. Looks like Kyle E. Christ is next. And Kyle writes, while talking with the socialist about owning the millions of lives lost under socialist ruling, he stated capitalism is more deadly and argued that there have been millions more lives lost with wars, World War I, World War II, etc., and fighting over resources to continue fueling their capitalism machine. Something feels off, but I cannot verbalize it. Additionally, they state our goods are still produced with slave labor overseas. How do you respond with the idea that capitalism has more blood on its hands via wars than socialism? First of all, let's talk about the wars. The wars since World War II were all started by socialists. They were socialists invading capitalist countries. North Korea is a socialist communist state, and it invaded South Korea, which was a free capitalist state. North Vietnam invaded South Vietnam. The Soviets went into Czechoslovakia, and the Soviets invaded Hungary, and the Soviets invaded Poland, and the Soviets did all of this. The Soviets went into Afghanistan. These are all wars that were started by the socialists. The socialists, by the way, you want to talk about the big one, about World War II, virtually, well, I won't say most of the damage, but certainly the majority of the damage in the European theater was caused between the conflict of the Nazis and the communists. The biggest battles in history, the biggest actual conflict in history was the Eastern Front in World War II. And what do these people have in common? He wants to put war on the door of capitalism. What are the names of the two parties that were having this gigantic slugfest that killed 20 million Russians and 52 million people worldwide? What were they called? One was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and the other one was called the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So I'm going to have to go with the wars and so on, since they were basically the two major combatants and had most of the killing done in wars in World War II, plus everything after World War II was launched by socialists. So I think they're kind of off base there. Furthermore, the socialist revolutions in China and in the Soviet Union, which we've been talking about, the socialist takeover in Germany, in Cambodia, Vietnam, all of them, they're bloodbaths. There are millions and millions of people killed. Millions of them are killed. In the American Revolution, no one was killed. There were no witch hunts afterwards. Nobody was put up against the wall and shot at the end of the American Revolution because they were on the side of the king. It just didn't happen. Happened in the French Revolution because they were kind of proto-socialists. This whole idea of the perfectibility of man is a certain way to get yourself killed. So, so as far as the wars goes, they're out of their mind. Now let's talk about the economic thing. You cannot deny 100 to 200 million people killed by socialism. And I mean killed, I mean shot in the back of the head. These are not counting the people who developed badly because they didn't have enough nutrition or who died of starvation at an early age. No. The two biggest famines in the history of the world were famines launched by the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China against their own populations. These are the two biggest famines in history, millions, 50 million probably in China, were the result of a all-powerful socialist state declaring war on their own people. So there's 150 million killed there. Now, in terms of whether or not capitalism is killing people, you're going to have to show me where capitalism is killing people. I don't see it. I can tell you one thing that capitalism is doing is feeding a lot of people. I had it right at the tip of my tongue. It'll come back to me in a second here. Norman Borlaug is an American agronomist, and he was the guy who first started playing around with the idea of modifying, breeding strains of wheat that would be able to grow more in dry climates or were more resistant to insects and so on. And Norman Borlaug saved billions. There are billions and billions and billions of people alive today because of the billions of people that Norman saved in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and so on. So they're eating. And anybody could take a look at historical video footage taken in China prior to, let's say, about 2000, where I did a documentary on China. I was doing 2 episodes on China. It was a big series on China, and I had 2 episodes, and one of them was on the Moon Festival. And they went and shot some footage in 1996, I think, and then they went back and shot some more footage in 2000, Norman Borlaug. And you could not cut the 2 tapes together. It just didn't cut. In the mid-90s, communist China looked like China had looked for thousands of years. There were people living in stone buildings with dirt floors, in Mao jackets, riding bicycles, dirt poor, starving, horrible. 4 years later, as a result of capitalism coming into the Chinese system, they're wearing suits on the corner, driving Mercedes with cell phones. And it happened like that. And their standard of living went through the ceiling. And people who tell you that capitalism is bad, these are the people who talk about how nice it is. At least, well, maybe we're living in stone huts or thatched huts with dirt floors, but at least we're all doing it together. You can go and live in one of those places right now, you miserable lying sack of stuff. No. It's capitalism has brought people out of poverty, and not just in China. Look at India, 1 billion people. 1 billion people. You look at Gandhi, you look at people like Gandhi, you don't see an awful lot of excess food there. And the reason is because prior to capitalism taking root in India, India was ruled by all kinds of different religious superstitions and you want to talk about discrimination. You cannot beat the Indian caste system in terms of just the cruelty of it. There are the Brahmins, and they're at the top of the pyramid, and they get to rule everything. And down at the bottom are the untouchables, and you can't even look at them directly. And you're born into these cases, and you can't do anything about it. So there you go. Capitalism destroyed this. They destroyed it. They simply went in there and said, "Who wants to work for a living?" And they do some very tough jobs over there. But it's better. And as far as this line about slave labor goes. Slave labor are workers who are being forced to work and who are kept by the people who are employing them after they finish the job for the day. I don't think anything out there is being made by slave labor that I'm aware of. People apply the term to conditions in places like China that are horrific, and I'm not trying to minimize those. Sweatshops, for example, are not slave labor. Slave labor is what happened in the Soviet Union. Slave labor is when you have to build a canal from the Baltic to the White Sea, and you take 150,000 lives to do it, and then the canal's not deep enough to take any ships. That's slave labor. The Gulag system was slave labor. All of the prisoners of the National Socialists were slave labor. In China, people making cell phones are not slaves. They're not slave labor. They are. It's a sweatshop, and the conditions are appalling, and I'm not denying that. But it's not slave labor, and the difference is because people are looking for those jobs. They may be miserable jobs building these cell phones, but people are fighting for them, and the reason they're fighting for them, you might want to just tell Kyle. You might want to just tell your socialist friend. Why does the socialist friend actually believe that there are people with machine guns marching them in there? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means that people are fighting for these horrible jobs that pay $2 a day and employ you for 10 hours in this sweatshop. They're fighting to have these jobs, killing each other practically, to get the jobs, because even though these jobs are horrible, the most horrible capitalist job is better than what's not out there with the job. Why do you think these people are so lined up to work in these horrible Chinese factories? Because it's better inside than it is outside. It is. And they can, well, how can you say that to people committing suicide? I understand there are people committing suicide. I'm not defending these things. It was like that in the West, but it was like that in the West 200 years ago. By the way, my ancestors, and I mean my great-great-grandparents and further, were mill workers in Lancashire, and I've seen the pictures of those mills, and they're not sweatshops, they're ice shops. It's freezing cold. There's no heating in there. It's just nothing but giant gears that are just ripping people's hands off, and children are cleaning the spindles and all the rest of it, and I'm descended from those people, and I'm proud to be descended from those people. But it's not slave labor. The reason that my family became mill workers and cotton carders, which is a horrible, unbelievably terrible way to live. Just so you know, I've mentioned this a few times on the show, but I'm going to say it again. Most of my two or three generations of my father's ancestors were cotton carders, and a cotton carder is somebody who works in a textile mill. And what a cotton carder does is this: he's given a flat piece of wood, probably about this big, and it's got a leather strap on one side, and he's got another one just like it. And coming out of the other side, the side that doesn't have the strap, are these little steel hooks, tiny little things like the kind of things you brush out a cat with. And a cotton carder would have one of these on each hand with a little leather thing there, and somebody would hand him a wad of basically virgin cotton. And the cotton carder would take this piece of cotton, and they would do this, and they would just do this. And what they're doing is the little hooks are straightening the cotton out, and they're lining the fibers, and the little seeds are coming out of there, and so on. And after, I don't know how much time you did on one of these things, 5 minutes, I don't know, whatever. You're doing it for 10 hours a day for 30 years of your life. This is what you're doing. And when you're finished, you've got a nice little roll of cotton that's clean, and you hand that off to the people. They take it to the spinners, and they start to spin it into thread. Then the thread goes into the mills, and they start to weave cloth out of it. You can say that's capitalism, and it's true. And it's also true that it's not very nice, but first of all, it improves itself. I don't have to be a cotton carder because my great-great-great-great-grandfather was. I don't have to do it. I'm not stuck in this cycle of ever ongoing poverty like they are in places that don't have capitalism. So they sacrificed so that I didn't have to, and I'm very grateful for that. But more importantly is the reason that people would become cotton carders in a textile mill in Lancashire is because the alternative was worse. The alternative was what my great-great-great-great-grandfathers did, my ancestors of the people who worked in the cotton mills. They were coal miners. And they weren't coal miners in a big old coal mine, which isn't pleasant anyway. They were coal miners where there was so much coal in England that they would have in their backyard, they'd have a coal mine. So I remember thinking in the town of Wigan, I wish it was Wigan, where my family's from, that there were something like 5,000 individual coal holes dug into the earth within a 5-mile radius of central downtown, something like that. So when my ancestors went from being, when they got the jobs at the textile mill, they were happy, and they were happy because it was an improvement of what was there before the textile mill came along. It's not me. This is not me saying, hey, this is wonderful, and I just think it's just great that people are coal miners and cotton carders. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying that it is an improvement over the life that existed before. So No, I don't buy it. I don't buy any of it. People have to eat. People have to stay warm. That's all there is to it. If you don't want to freeze to death, you have to either go out and mine coal, or you have to send somebody you're related to go out and mine coal. And otherwise, we all freeze. And this kind of smug academic sort of, oh, capitalism kills millions of people. Well, no, it doesn't. It's the absence of capitalism that kills millions of people. And while capitalism may provide some harsh environments, in the early stages of capitalism in a country, it improves. And the fact that people are lining up to take those jobs is saying that even at its most primitive, even at its most brutal, even at its most unfair, at its most disgraceful, disgusting, dangerous, all of that, dirty, even then, it's better than what was going on in the rest of the world, because if it wasn't, nobody would have left the farms to come to the cities. You know? If it wasn't better, people weren't doing it because they're not slave labor. It's an insult to call it that. You'll hear people, sometimes you hear academics talking about what they do is slave labor because they have to work for a living. Matthew Lloyd has a question. Let's see here. Boy, big one. You know what? I'm going to answer this one. I think that's going to call it a night. I know it's going to be a very short Stratosphere Lounge. I'm very sorry about that. But I do have an awful lot of things I have to do tonight. And as I said, I'm hungry. Here's Matthew's question. It's a long one. I don't know what it says yet. Bill, I need some career advice. I've got a buddy who is thinking about changing careers and has asked me for advice. He's thinking about applying at a local university for an opening as an equal opportunity Title IX investigator. He would investigate allegations of discrimination, harassment, sexual misconduct, etc. The university leans on the more progressive side, even by university standards. He's fairly conservative, and I have some concerns, but I'm not sure what to tell him. It would be a good financial move for him, and it would allow his wife to stop working so that they can focus on having kids and starting a family. His perspective is that if we don't have good, sane people in that position, then we'll only have the activist crazies. My concern is that this could be an exercise in futility and a doomed move from the start. It's one thing to fight the good fight, but this seems more like throwing a mongoose into a whole den of cobras. If his colleagues, his supervisors, and the institution in general are against his brand of common sense, I don't know for sure that they are, but it seems a reasonable guess, then I can see this quickly becoming soul-crushing rather than an opportunity to do good. Maybe I'm wrong, though. Please share your thoughts. I don't think you're wrong. A well-paying job is very attractive, and if it's something that's a step up socially and financially, people want to take it. And the argument about keeping good people in the system is a valid argument, and God knows it's something noble and something we should applaud your friend for. But you're absolutely right. They're not going to be able to make a difference because the environment is so ideological and so overwhelming. So it's not just quantity, it's quality as well. You're moving into a toxic pit. I went to Stephen Austin University in Nacogdoches, Texas, and the level of fanaticism and enforced internal ignorance was so overwhelming, Matthew, that I just coming out of there, I remember thinking, there comes a point when you realize you cannot bail the Titanic. You just can't. You can fight it. You can work the pumps. You can do everything you can to stop that ship from going down. But there's going to come a point when you realize this ship is going to the bottom, and the question is, am I going with it? That's how I feel about universities today. All of them, no exceptions except for Hillcrest, or Hillhurst rather. They're all, I think, fatally compromised. And when I say fatally compromised, I think what I mean by that is these universities are going to have to fail, and the consequences of these decisions that these administrators have made are going to have to happen. It's not going to happen soon, but it is going to happen. They are manufacturing fanatical children with murder in their eyes, and they deserve each other. Many times now we're starting to hear about professors, progressive professors, who are somewhat shocked at the virulence of these young students, and they try to point out to them, no, you don't understand, I'm a progressive like you are. And then to their utter amazement, these professors will hear the students say, yes, but you're a male professor, or you're a white professor, you're a white male professor. As some woman's been, trumpeting feminist causes for 40 years, and she gets up there and expects the undying gratitude of the tearful, multitudes. And what they get instead is this woman who's been fighting for feminism her entire life. I said, what do you know about feminism? You're a white woman. You don't know anything about feminism. It's all transactional feminism. You can't know what feminism is until you're a LGBT woman of color feminist. And so they eat their own. And that's what has to happen, right? When your whole philosophy is about other people and about envy and victimhood, then it's like Highlander. There can be only one. There can only be one top victim. Somebody's going to trump somebody, and somebody's going to trump somebody else. Perfect example of this was Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in 2008. Hillary Clinton was running on the I'm a woman, I'm a victim, I'm a woman, it's time for a woman. And she got trumped by Barack Obama, said, tough break, kid, but I'm black, and that trumps your position in terms of the hierarchy of victimhood and social injustice. So that's what happened. Matthew, I don't want to look. I don't know anything about the situation. I don't know what the college is like or anything. But since you asked me, I would advise that person to run away. Run away. You, rather than feeling like they're doing some good and being a small candle in the darkness, they're going to end up hating themselves and likely get fired. Because if they do what the right thing is, then they're going to either get fired or reprimanded and be despised by everybody else in their entire community, not just the people at college, but the people in the town as well. And if, on the other hand, which I think is more likely, they start to go along to get along, they're going to come home at night and they're going to look at the ceiling and they're going to say, I've just compromised. I've compromised everything I believe in. I'm one of them now. I think it's a very poor idea. I think that the idea of that skill set could be very important, and the idea of wanting to help people and change the culture is very good. I'm utterly convinced that the university system in this country is going to go down, and that the answer is going to be a sort of a college version of homeschooling. And to the internet has done an awful lot to damage the society, but it's done an awful lot of good too. And the idea that you could, right now, you could just go out and get a master's degree online. Just do it. And in many cases, you can do it for free. Somebody has to understand that this is the future, that the idea of these ivy and brick physical locations is coming to an end, which is a shame, by the way. It's a real shame, because university and college and universities was quite an amazing experience. But they're not places where you can be challenged anymore. They're not places where you learn something new. That's why I like going to college. I like meeting people and hearing things I hadn't heard before. Now you go in and you come out stupider than you were when you went in. It's stupider and also more fanatical. You're smaller. By the way, I mentioned this in an email to our members, but I know many of you aren't. When the event was over, I was talking to people, and we had a number of people come down, fans of mine, and supporting me, and so they stayed and talked, and we took some pictures and all the rest of it. And Malibu Trotsky decided that he was not going to leave because there was still great evil to be faced in the world. So he followed me out to the car, and we had two policemen walking right beside us, and he's a foot away from me, and calling me the vilest names you can imagine. As I say, this is not my inclination to take it. He called me a string of four-letter words to my face this far away. And I don't know where this came from. I genuinely don't know where it came from, but he got that out, and I looked at him, and instead of wanting to hit the guy, I just looked at him and said, if I had any respect for you at all, I think that would have hurt my feelings. So we go out to the car, and the police are with us, the two policemen. They've been called murderers by this guy and state executioners and all the rest. So this guy is following us out to the car, and he's explaining why he's able to follow us out to the car. It was his right to follow us out to the car, and true enough, there you go. So finally, Malibu Trotsky retreats into the shadows from whence he came. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. The policeman looked at me after he'd gone and said, "Don't let him bother you, sir. His world is very small." I thought, wow, okay. what a beautiful thing to say. So I asked him about his background. Turns out the policeman was a gunner, heavy gunner in the Army, right around Gulf War time. So he got to be called an assassin as a policeman. He got to be called a mass murderer, psychopathic lunatic by for his work in the Army, by a guy who's never had a job, I'm sure, who hates everything, for whom nothing matches the internal splendor of his magnificent rage, But I couldn't have put it better if I lived 1,000 years. He's absolutely right. His world is very small. And I suspect, Matthew, that's what your friend is going to find. I suspect he's going to wake up and say, rather than having a chance to get in this fight, I suspect he's going to find himself in a very, very small world and surrounded by people that he does not like. We have an editor who's done a great job with the right angles, and we're going to start handing off more work to him. And he was living in L.A. when I met him, hired him 3-4 months ago, I guess. And then he moved to Colorado. And I asked him why, and he said because, well, he's obviously conservative, and so is his wife, and said, we can't take it anymore. My wife goes to work in a studio, and we just can't take it anymore, being surrounded by these people. We don't like what they think, but we're willing to listen, but they're not willing to listen, and they're filled with rage and hostility, and it's just not worth it. We're going to go where there's some real people. And that's what they did. So I suspect that that's what your friend's going to have happen. So there you go. I'm going to have to answer this one, and I'm skipping Cheryl Toomey's question. But this one I just want to take real quick because it's something I think about. It's from Derek Benningfield, and this will be the last one for the night, folks. Do you think that the F-22 production should be restarted given the low number built and the fact that these numbers are only going to drop as operational use continues? Also, what are your thoughts about aircraft such as the F-18 Advanced Super Hornet and the F-15 Silent Eagle as possible alternatives to the F-35? Sorry about this, guys. I just cannot walk past an aviation question, especially military aviation. I can't do it. It's not possible for me. I think I saw Viper check in earlier, so we'll see how I do on this from a guy who really knows what he's talking about. First of all, the F-35 is starting to look a little bit better than it did a year or two ago. And it's starting to look a little bit better because I try to be open-minded and I want to be right. I've spent a lot of time condemning that aircraft, airframe and so on. And it was outflown by an F-16 a year or 2 years ago or something, and it cost $1 trillion. And the cost is not going away. It's the worst managed program in the history of the world. That's undoubtedly true. The question is the plane as bad as we thought it was? And I've been reading lately that it's not as bad as we thought it was. And one of the reasons that we thought it was so bad was because the pilots transitioning from F-16, F-15 into the, and I guess F-18s in the Navy, that the pilots transitioning into these F-35s had not yet figured out how much more capable this airplane was and wasn't able to run it to its envelope, wasn't able to take it to what the plane is able to do. By the way, if you've ever heard the term pushing the envelope, very few people know what that is, but any aircraft has a performance chart. You can perform its amount of weight that it'll carry, its lift, its top speed, all the rest of it. And you plot this thing on a graph. When you plot it on a graph, it looks a little bit like an envelope. So when you're pushing the envelope, you're taking an airplane to certified gross weight or higher. You're taking it to maximum permissible airspeed or higher or slower than it's, you got to figure out where those limits are. You got to figure out where the envelope is. So anyway, they're learning a lot. So the F-35 is looking better than I thought it was a year or two ago. But the F-22 is unquestionably the premier fighter in the world. Absolutely without question. Time and time again, you'd hear of 1 or 2 F-22s going up against 4 F-15s, which is currently the world's premier air-to-air combat vehicle. An amazing airplane, the F-15. But they would put an F-22 up against 4 F-15s, and the F-15s would never see it. They'd all get shot down before they even saw it. Then they put it up against 8 or 16 or so on. So the F-22 is an amazing, amazing airplane. And the thing that infuriates me about this, because I didn't know this until relatively recently, is that in order to get the F-35 deal, Lockheed Lockheed came into an agreement, and Lockheed wanted this. It wasn't the government that wanted this. Lockheed wanted this. They said that if we're going to do the F-35 program, then we have to destroy the construction. They're not really molds. What's the word I'm looking for? Somebody will tell me in a second. Basically, what they did was they said that now that we're going to start making F-35s, we're going to destroy any chance we have of making F-22s again. All of these things that they built in order to build F-22s, they destroyed. So what does that tell you? You can't simply just go in and restart it. And this is the thing that makes me insane. Again, we're talking about this a couple times tonight. It's not like I can understand that people don't know what they don't know. Maybe they thought it was a good idea. Tooling, thank you, Viper. Maybe they thought it was a good idea to cancel the F-22 and to start the F-35, and maybe it was a good idea. But when they destroy the tooling, when they destroy the ability to manufacture new ones, all of these things are custom made, Not each individual jet, obviously, but the F-22 tooling and all of the things that goes into building an F-22 is made specifically for the F-22, and that's all. And when you destroy those things, you essentially have to start from scratch for basically like designing a new airplane from the ground up. So we destroyed the ability to manufacture more of the best fighter aircraft in the world, in the history of the world. And now we've got a limited number. I do not, for the life of me, remember. I want to say that it's something like 122 or something like that. And since we're not building any new ones, the numbers are going to continue to go down. They're going to lose them in combat. We're going to lose them in training accidents and so on. So that is just insanely annoying. And so F-35, a little better than we thought. Maybe, in fact, a good deal better than we thought. Maybe it's excellent. I don't know. But it wasn't excellent when it rolled out, and it is without question enormously over budget. You can't escape that aspect of it. It would be nice if it turns out that this gigantic trillion-dollar catastrophe produced a fighter that was capable of doing what it's supposed to be doing. But back to Lenin for a second, because the American strategy has always been, since we value our people highly and since we have a lot of money, we are going to invest in aircraft and training so that one American fighter should be able to defeat a large number of adversary aircraft. So they gold plate the weapons and all of that, which I'm in favor of because I'd like to see our people come home. So the idea is F-35 or F-22 or F-15 even is very expensive compared to something like the MiG-21, which is dirt cheap to make. And our argument is, well, since we have very few pilots and since they're citizens, we love them and care about them, we want them to come home, so spend the money on the airplane and the training and have these F-15 shoot down 10, 15, 20 MiG-21s. The other side is all cannon fodder. They don't care. They're just going to put, pilots into these things and send up enough of them. But Lenin said, so now what you've got here, same thing with the M16 versus the AK-47. I'm not going to get into that, but it's the same argument and the same rationale. The M16 is a precision weapon, and the AK-47 is an inexpensive, reliable weapon. Our idea with the M16 is, and we train our soldiers, give them the top optics and all the rest, we should be able to take out enemy soldiers before they get into AK-47 range. And they've got these iron sights and so on and so on. Anyway, you get the idea. So it's always been, for us, it's always been quality over quantity. Anyway, since the end of World War II. In World War II, we had just the exact opposite. World War II, we were all about quantity. The Germans were making far better tanks than we were, and so were the Soviets. T-34 is probably the weapon of the war. So in World War II, we were completely backwards from where we are now. In World War II, our attitude was, let's just make an awful lot of good stuff rather than spend everything we have on something great. And that was the German weakness, was their engineering skill was their weakness. They're such excellent engineers and they're so detailed and they engineer everything, over-engineer everything. There's some old record about these people. It's a fragment of something I heard 50 years ago, but it was something about different nationalities and their race cars out on the racetrack. And one of them, you go finally to the German car and you find out that the driver has a little handkerchief pocket, and it's right in the center of his chest so as not to disturb the delicate balance of the car. In World War II, the Nazis were building tremendous stuff. They're building fighter jets. The Me-262 is 100 miles an hour faster than our P-51s, which was a great airplane. And things like the King Tiger tank are essentially invulnerable, and the V2s and all this stuff. So they invest all these things, but they couldn't make enough of them. And since they couldn't make enough of them, they were rather easily overwhelmed by these excellent weapons. Wonder weapons were overwhelmed by large numbers of very good weapons. And that was what we used to be doing. But since then, we've changed our strategy. And I think that's fine. I think it's good. So here's the problem. As Lenin said, quantity has a quality all its own. And if it turns out that our weapons are excellent, just quite superior to what the rest of the world is making, but they cost so much money that we have relatively few of them, and we lose because of that, then we've made the wrong decision. So, without question, if I had the ability to restart the F-22, I'd have 1,000. I'd build 1,000 F-22s, at least 1,000. Because then you own the skies. And if you own the skies, you don't need an F-35. You could do ground attack. And they're saying, well, we need the F-35 to do ground attack because of stealth qualities. If you own the skies in F-22s and you have things like A-10s and drones to knock out enemy air defenses, who cares? So just the last part of your question, which I like a lot for those people who haven't heard or seen of these things. So with the F-35 in such incredible trouble, so far behind schedule, so much over budget, Lockheed and Boeing have taken what have been the world's best fighter aircraft, and General Dynamics has done it too, and they've just almost remade them. So the F-15 Eagle is an unprecedented air-to-air victory record. Years ago, it was 172 to nothing. I don't know if it's gone up since then. But they've done a version of the Eagle called the Silent Eagle, which has a great deal of stealth qualities in it. It's not as stealthy as the F-22. I don't think it's even close, but it's stealthier than a regular F-15. And the same thing with the Advanced Super Hornet. There was the Hornet, and then there was the Super Hornet, and now there's the Advanced Super Hornet, which has things like conformal fuel tanks and weapons pods, and it's a lot stealthier than a regular Hornet. The good news here is that these things are actually relatively inexpensive because we've been building them forever. We have large numbers of them. We understand them very well. So what I'm trying to say here is I would love to have more F-22s. The F-35s are looking better than I thought, which makes me very happy. But since they were so expensive, we have small numbers of these things. And what I would do to fill the gap is I would, in fact, upgrade F-18. I'd upgrade the F-15. The F-16 upgrade doesn't even look like an F-16 anymore. It's got these gigantic things on the side. And what used to be the most elegant lines in the history of the world, I think the F-16 is the best-looking airplane that ever built. And now they've got these first of all, now it's a two-seater airplane. It's that, and it's got these gigantic, sensor bays and stuff going down the spine of the thing. Barely looks like an F-16 at all, but it's far more capable than the original blocks of F-16s. So, if it were me, since you asked, I'd restart F-22. I'd eat what we've got with the F-35. We're starting to see the pilots really starting to like them and starting to understand them. So, at least we got some bang for the buck. And then I would fill the gaps with next generation versions of these tried and true airframes, and that's what I would do. And I'd stay on top of R&D. I'd be prepared to be surprised as we were with the MiG-15 when the Soviets built that airplane and we were flying propeller airplanes, and this tiny, nimble, very fast, very light fighter comes in and messes up our stuff for quite a while, for 4, 5, 6 months. And the F-86 comes along, and that's the end of that. So we always have to be looking at what's going to be the next aircraft, what's going to be the next F-22, F-15, P-51 down the line. And that's what I would do. I had one more point about this. What was it? I don't know. Oh, I do know. I remember. All of our weapons are getting a little long in the tooth. The Nimitz was commissioned, I want to say, around 72. What's it, 45 years ago? And they're retiring them, but they will have all served a half a century, these Nimitz-class carriers. Think about that. Weapons move so fast. the idea that a warship could be not only viable but superlative, the world's best for half a century, not just the same model. I mean, the same actual ship, the same steel, is cutting edge, state of the world's world beater for half a century. Amazing. So some of these airframes are just going and going. Probably the classic two examples of this are the C-130 and the B-52. I want to say the C-130 was first built around 1953, 54, somewhere in there. The B-52 as well, right around in there. So these aircraft are well over half a century old. They're pushing. They're going to go to 2020. That means they're going to be 75 years in service or more, maybe 20, 25, something like that. And so they basically stopped building B-52s 40, 50 years ago, something like that. And we've got the airframes, so what do? We improve the electronics, we put better engines on them, we do all this other stuff, and they become far better airplanes than they were when they were designed. And the same thing for the C-130, which is such a perfect design that I don't think it's ever going to leave. Same thing for the Huey, the UH-1 helicopter. There's some things that you get so right that there's just not going to be much improving on it. 737 is that way too. 737 is the perfect commercial jetliner for relatively short haul missions. It's just ideal. When it first came out, the 737 they called it the Fat Man because it was so short and wide. Tiny little engines right underneath the wings, and it gets better and better and better and better and better and better. Because you can't really improve on the fundamental design of 737 or the C-130 or the B-52. And F-15, 16, and 18 are just terrific airframes, and I'd like to see. I've seen all of these things, and it seems like a very cost-effective way to get back on the side of the quality and quantity equation that Vladimir talks so compellingly about. He ought to know. 1954 for the C-130. Thank you, Dave Big Booty. So anyway, that's it for tonight. This boy's got to upload a new After Hours, which we did this week. Is my friend Larry O'Connor. He's terrific. And we'll see if we can't get Mike Rowe in here for After Hours. That could be a good one. Thank you, Aesop's Retreat, for being the first one to say good night. Good night. Thank you. Very kind. And you're a superb person, as is everybody else here that hangs around in this particular corner of the internet. All 102 of you at this moment. So that'll do it for the Stratosphere Lounge episode number, 153? Yes, I think so. We're still here, still doing it. And it's always a pleasure. Sometimes it's very tough to get in there, but sometimes it's always worth it. I always have a good time. All right, so that'll do it for Stratosphere Lounge, and we will see you hopefully next week. I don't think I'm going to be out of town, and so we will get a chance to get together and listen to Petula Clark and ask her more questions and answer them if we can. And so until next Wednesday, I'm your host, Bill Whittle. Thanks very much for joining us, and we will see you soon.